one standardized test I will say that I'm very glad is no longer being tested in the state of Florida is the FCAT. And I took the FCAT, and a few years after I graduated high school is when they abolished it, which was kind of depressing. I did not like it whatsoever because what the teachers would teach you wouldn't actually be on the FCAT. Like, for instance, in 11th grade, I took the science FCAT. It was the first year, 2008 to 9, that they were doing the science FCAT. They were testing it out. And so my science teacher was teaching us everything that was supposed to be on there. I went into the test being like, okay, I'll know some of the stuff on there. And it turns out none of it was on the test. So I Christmas treed the entire thing, and I slept through the rest of it. But since that was the first year of the test, there was no downfall to failing. So if you didn't fail at my school, you didn't get the incentive, which was off-campus lunch once a month. I mean, that's not that great of an incentive, to be honest, but that just goes to show you how little they cared about teaching us new testing and everything else. In relation to Chapter 3, something that is still challenging or confusing for me to get my mind around is all of the testing we put these children through, especially in elementary school, because at infancy and toddlers, preschool, they don't know that they're being tested because it's not put in front of them black and white. The teachers are the ones that are administering the challenges and everything to test these children. So most of the time it's just a game to them. It's a fun way to learn. But with elementary, they put these children through so much testing. And most of the time, these teachers stress themselves out. And it's crazy because these teachers don't need to be stressing themselves out over these standardized tests that are absurd and ridiculous. And if you have children in your classroom that are terrible at testing and they bomb the test, it's going to make you look like a bad teacher, which is 1,000% not fair to the child and to the teacher. So I really think the Department of Education needs to review all of these standardized tests and really see if we honestly need all of these different types of tests out there. So in Chapter 4, they're talking about norm-referenced and criterion-referenced tests. And norm-reference testing provides information on how the performance of an individual compares with that of others. The criterion-reference test, they provide information on how the individual performed on some standard or objective. So that one is really specific to one standard or objective. I personally prefer the criterion reference testing because, like I stated, you're being tested on something specific, like one standard or one objective. With the norm reference testing, you're basically being tested to have your scores compared to somebody else's scores, which I don't think is fair because, like I said, for Chapter 3, everybody tests differently. One child may have really bad anxiety that day and do really bad on the test, and that's going to reflect poorly on them. But it's not their fault. They just had a moment where they blinked out. Looking at the uses of criterion reference tests with school-age children, I see a sample of a developmental screening instrument called Early Screening Inventory, which is this chart. And it's very similar to what I used in the 2- and 3-year-old classroom when we thought we had a child that might have a behavioral problem or might need to be screened for a learning disability or language disability. What I like about this is they really go in detail about different tasks and abilities that the child can or cannot do, depending on what they already know. So, for instance, they want them to put 10 blocks on a piece of construction paper. So they want them to build a tower and use all the blocks. Now, most children should be able to do this, no problem. But this is a great way to really look at their visual motor and also their fine and gross motor skills, because you don't know where they could be at their age. They could be having fine and gross motor delay. The other one on here is the number concept for language and cognition. They want them to count the blocks and point to each one and count out loud so that the teacher can hear. And this sheet is specific for 4.6 to 6-year-olds. So at this age, they should be able to count to 10 and point to each block. But some children, this is not only language and cognition, this is also visual. Some children, once they point to a block and say 1, and they have to do that extra motion to point to the second one, they may have already forgotten what number they just said. With the norm reference testing, when you get your scores, for instance, in the book, it states that for like a result in social science, the norm reference only shows the result of the overall group, whereas the criterion referenced will break it down into, say, 8 subcategories like the book mentions, and will go into more detail and be super specific about where your strengths and your weaknesses are so that you can better work with them with your teacher. The book mentions some advantages of standardized tests, and I will say there's one that I do not agree with, and this is validity and reliability. It states that validity establishes whether a test measures the characteristics it was designed to measure. So if the test is designed to measure intelligence, does it actually yield results that show the child's level of intelligence? Like I've stated previously, it's not going to be completely valid, especially if the child didn't get enough sleep, didn't eat breakfast, felt confident going into the test, and then all of a sudden looked at the test and blanked out or realized that they forgot what they were taught. So that can't, that can't be used for validity or reliability, because say that student is a great test taker and that test they completely bombed. How are you going to validate their level of intelligence based on that one single test? The other thing that I'm reading about standardized testing is measurement limitations. FAIR test states that the students answer all the same questions in a multiple choice format, and it doesn't measure the ability to think or create in any field. You're basically there to answer those multiple choice questions and just be done with the test. You're given a time limit, and each question only has one correct answer. So really, it's not testing your actual learning ability. It's testing your recall ability to remember what you were taught and remember the right answers for each question. A good example of the test failing somebody that I saw when I was taking my test, because in high school I had a 504 plan, so I had extra time on every standardized test. I even had extra time in the classroom for, just regular testing. But when I was taking the FCAT one year, there was a ELL student taking the test in this classroom, because it was all students that either had an IEP or a 504, were given extra time for whatever reason. And it was really sad because they handed this ELL student an English to Spanish dictionary. And that was how they were supposed to translate their test. It wasn't in Spanish for them. It was in complete English, and they were given a dictionary, which I think personally is appalling. They should accommodate this child. You know, even though they know English, there are a lot of words on these standardized tests that are big words that a lot of us have not even heard of. So imagine being that student and there's a big word they've never heard of, and they have to flip through this dictionary for 5 minutes to find this word, and they're already losing time to do well on this test.